technical glitch there. Good afternoon. My name is Wayne Bugden. I'm a project manager with the University of Connecticut Technical Assistance to Brownfields program, or UConn TAB. With me today is Monica Passano. Monica is senior counsel with the Center for Community Progress. A brief introduction to our organizations. For those of you who don't know of us, or you're not familiar with our work, University of Connecticut Technical Assistance to Brownfields, UConn TAB is an EPA-funded group. Our mission is to help communities, states, tribal entities, nonprofit groups to address brownfield issues. It's a pretty broad mandate that we have. We do this with technical assistance, such as preparing site reuse plans, brownfield inventories, record reviews, where we examine a site's history. We also help with communities with community engagement on brownfield projects, project strategizing. We do reviews on grant applications for brownfields. We help with procurement and education. Best of all, our services are always free. We're housed at the University of Connecticut, but we serve all 6 New England states. And essentially, if there's something we can do to help you address a brownfield challenge that you have, we will do it. And I'll pass it over to Monica to tell a little bit about her organization.
Thank you so much, Wayne, and thank you to UConn TAB for inviting me to this presentation. So I am, as Wayne mentioned, senior counsel here at Center for Community Progress. The Center for Community Progress is the only national nonprofit that is really focused on helping communities address vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties. We do this really through working closely with communities to foster and really grow what is needed in your community to really support community investment in those vacant properties, with a focus on transforming those underutilized assets into utilized assets for the benefit of a community. Again, can you advance the slide a little, Wayne?
Okay.
So we do this through, through 3.
Sorry about that.
Nope, you're fine. We do this primarily through three areas: education, advocacy, and delivering custom technical assistance to communities. Our technical assistance and our education focuses typically on 4 areas that are usually highly impactful in addressing vacant and abandoned properties in communities. Through data and looking at how data is really crucial, data around the property types and the different specifics around each property, really around how that's crucial to understanding your property challenges in a community, but also understanding and activating strategic solutions to address those problems. Code enforcement. So code enforcement is often the first line of defense in communities around vacant and abandoned properties. They're often the first folks from a municipality coming into contact with vacant properties and property owners. So it's really crucial to figure out ways for their work to be strategic, equitable, and to the extent possible, as proactive as it can. We do the other 2 areas are tax foreclosure. So tax foreclosures is often an early indicator, delinquent taxes, of potential vacancy or distress in properties. And so really working with communities to build efficient tax systems is valuable. Additionally, tax foreclosure is a really powerful tool to transfer those properties that have long-standing delinquency from owners who aren't invested to owners who are. And the final piece is land banking. So these are helping communities, particularly in states that have land bank legislation, which some of the states on this call do, but not all of them. And really working with states to create and set up land banks that can hold those vacant properties and be responsible for them when the market isn't always prepared to address those properties. So that's Center for Community Progress overall. Obviously, I didn't touch a ton on brownfields in that discussion, but as you all can imagine and know, many of the properties that fit into that vacant, abandoned, deteriorated properties category are also brownfields. So we work closely with communities on how to be really strategic in your approach to properties that, you know, in a sort of in a Venn diagram are both brownfields and vacant and abandoned. So we're looking forward to connecting with you all about that today.
Okay. Thank you, Monica, for that. I'm going to start by just some introduction information, what today's agenda is, and who the intended audience is. So the intended audience is the user of an environmental site assessment, and that's an industry term. Actually, these are the people or entities that commission a phase one to be performed. And the user will rely on that phase one to make decisions and obtain liability protection. And we'll talk a lot about that. Our goal today is to give users, people who are using a phase one site assessment, a better appreciation for what a phase one is, and the importance of a high quality phase one as a valuable tool to protect your interests, basically. After the webinar, I hope, we all hope that you'll be a better consumer of environmental consulting services, and particularly, excuse me, when purchasing a phase one site assessment. And even if you're not a user, if you never are commissioning a phase one site assessment yourself, but you play a role in brownfield, in facilitating brownfield cleanup and redevelopment, it's important to understand the objectives of a phase one, how it is performed, because it is the basis for ultimately for a successful cleanup and redevelopment. So our discussion today should help you as well. Today's agenda, briefly, we're going to talk about what a phase one is and also what a phase one is not. Our objective is not to talk about, this is not a how-to webinar. There are literally hundreds, maybe thousands of guides and recorded presentations that you can find online from many different entities that will tell you about the various components of a phase one, if you're not all that familiar with it, what's supposed to be in it, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But we do want to talk a little bit about today about understanding how a phase one affects the liability aspects, and some myths and misconceptions about phase ones. And so we'll go over a little bit of that. This webinar is also not a how-to guide for applying for liability protection. That's beyond the scope, but we're going to talk a lot about liability and how phase one plays into that, into obtaining liability protection for people who are owning or invested in a brownfield site. And again, and one of the common themes you'll hear today is we are encouraging you to reach out to the local authorities, people in your state who are the experts in brownfields in your state, because as we'll talk about, phase one site assessments need to be adjusted and adapted for the particulars of a particular state. So you'll hear that a lot. Second, we're going to talk about how a phase one protects the user from liability, both legal liability under federal and state law, and also the risks associated with a lack of available information, reliable information, I should say. As we'll see, a missing piece of information or a data gap can be a major liability to anyone working to clean up and revitalize a brownfield site. So there are a few things more harmful to a planned brownfield redevelopment than finding contamination after construction is already underway. So this gets back to the quality of a phase one. Third, we're going to briefly discuss some other resources that are unlocked by conducting a phase one environmental site assessment, maybe give you a better appreciation for the value of these. And we'll also briefly discuss, we'll finally do our best at the end to answer any questions that are submitted in the chat during the that you can submit in the chat during the presentation. Want to go over a couple of quick fundamental concepts. What is the purpose of a phase one? First, phase one is environmental due diligence, and that's a term you probably are familiar with, but it's important to kind of see where phase ones where they began and why. Before the 1980s, people didn't worry much about environmental due diligence. If they were considering buying a commercial or industrial property, they might have an inspection to check on a building condition or mechanical systems, but no one really worried about whether their predecessors released contaminants into the environment. It's hard to imagine today, given how things are so sophisticated with environmental due diligence, but even when they were buying an old gas station back then, they might not have even asked, how old are the tanks in the ground, the underground storage tanks? What are their condition? Very hard to imagine that today. But after the Superfund law in 1980 and some other federal and state legislation, environmental due diligence became increasingly important as a means for buyers and investors to protect themselves against liability and business risk. And so today, the process of environmental due diligence is codified in many rules and regulations, and the process of conducting a phase one is standardized and pretty sophisticated. The second fundamental concept today is keep in mind is what the purpose of a phase one is. At its most fundamental level, a phase one is an important tool to protect your organization from risk. And because of this importance, to your organization and to your brownfield project, you need to know, what a phase one will give you and maybe what it doesn't give you. And so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how risk comes from legal liability, but also from unknown factors, those data gaps I mentioned that may stand in your way of a successful project. A phase one is the first step in trying to eliminate those risks as well. As I mentioned, the webinar is not a how-to guide, but it is important to kind of know about these minimum standards that apply. And you may have heard of these. If you've had any familiarity with phase ones, you've seen probably a reference to some of these things. What's called the primary standard is codified in EPA's All Appropriate Inquiries final rule. You'll see it abbreviated as AAI. This is the government basically saying you can have certain liability protections under federal law, but only if you, as the buyer, you do your due diligence, meaning that you ask all the right questions before you acquire the property. EPA didn't create like a prescriptive cookbook of what it means to do your all appropriate inquiry. And for that, they recognize ASTM standard E1527, standard practice for environmental site assessments. This is the primary methodology to satisfy all appropriate inquiry. And then lastly, many federal and state agencies have adopted the ASTM standard, and then some have supplemented them for specific requirements for their location or their program. Getting into all of the specific requirements is beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today, but you should know that if you are going to get a phase one, you're going to commission a phase one, excuse me, it's important for you to know how it's going to be used. It has certain meaning and importance to different agencies. And so again, if it's going to be used to satisfy some other programmatic requirement, reach out to the experts and of the specific state or the funding program and ensure that your phase one will achieve all the requirements for that. And we'll talk, and Monica will talk a little bit about that as well. The elements of a phase one, as I said, we're not going to get into all of the details of what a phase one includes, but this is just a list of the different resources that are used to produce the phase one. These are in the standard. These are things that the person doing the phase one, the environmental professional doing the phase one, must do at a minimum. And up at the top here, it says it's a detailed review and professional analysis. And the analysis is the thing that sometimes people overlook. It's not just taking a bunch of information and regurgitating it into a report. The environmental professional needs to analyze the importance of the information that they see, that they collect, and make conclusions and sometimes make adjustments to their scope based on that. And so the professional judgment of the environmental professional is a very important concept here. A little bit about what a phase one is and what it is not. And again, not getting into the details of the elements that go into it. But before we talk about the risk and liability in greater depth, I want to take a couple of minutes about to kind of dispel some of these myths. First off, a phase one, as I mentioned, it's a professional service that relies on specialized knowledge and professional judgment, and it needs to be customized for the needs of the user. It is not a commodity, and unfortunately, and this is a situation where you get what you pay for. And in fact, if you get a very good phase one, you might get a lot more than what you pay for. Phase ones are not very expensive for what you get from them. Treating a phase one like a commodity means that you're trying to, you're going to take the low price. You want something done as quickly as possible. If you approach a phase one that way, when you're commissioning it, you might get what you pay for, which is your environmental professional might do only the barest minimum of work to meet the standard or their contract. When what you really need is to have your environmental professional do the best job that they can. And this gets back to minimizing risk. Also, it's not a one size fits all. I mentioned this earlier. The ASTM standard is the minimum standard, but a phase one must be tailored to the individual states and programs. A phase one is also an investigation to assess if historical uses or activities may have the potential to have impacted soil or groundwater, and potentially could pose a risk to human health or the environment. So it doesn't tell you whether there's contamination. This is not testing of soil, groundwater, building materials, and it's also not a means to estimate cleanup costs. If you, it doesn't tell you, like I said, if contaminants are present. Sometimes people have this misconception that, well, I've got a phase one, and the first thing they'll ask their consultant is, how much is it going to cost to clean it up? Well, you don't have that information yet. And if anybody says after a phase one that they can estimate cleanup costs, I would recommend that you doubt them. Because that comes later. And so by now, it should be evident that it is not proof, a phase one is not proof that there is or is not contamination on a site. That comes later. A phase one is completed prior to property acquisition is a requirement of federal liability protections. And and Monica will speak more about this. And so you may know that if you may have heard that term before about all appropriate inquiry and connection of that to liability protections. So but in order to get those liability protections, you need to do these. You need to do your all appropriate inquiry before you acquire the property. If phase one is completed prior to property acquisition, in order to be eligible for brownfield grants and other federal programs. So these 2 points go hand in hand. EPA is not going to, EPA and other funding agencies are not going to want to give you funding for a property if you are a responsible party, meaning that you don't have liability protection. So it's very critical that you do your all appropriate inquiry first, get your liability protection, and then be eligible for brownfield grants and other programs that are available through EPA and through other entities. And so it's not, so that's what it is. It's not a simple box to be checked. This is a point I want to make very clear. And it's thinking of a phase one as a box to be checked, will, pardon me, will result in a poor quality phase one. And it really takes, it prevents you from taking full advantage of what your phase one has to offer you. Lastly, before I pass over to Monica, A phase one is also the first step and critical foundation of comprehensive cleanup programs. So these are federal and state programs. The phase one is that foundation for everything that comes later. And if you do a poor phase one, everything that comes later is at risk of being incomplete. And so a phase one is, you'll hear a lot of people say this, it's the cheapest insurance you can buy. And the reason for that is that knowledge is the most valuable tool when addressing brownfields. Uncertainty is the enemy of a brownfield project, and knowledge is your most valuable ally. So with that, I will pass this over to Monica.
Thank you so much, Wayne. So I'm gonna dig a little bit more into some of those liability considerations. I'll do the broad overarching. While I'm an attorney, I am not any of your attorney or licensed in all of your states. So none of this is legal advice. The super fun lawyer prerequisite to discussions. But I'm going to talk a little bit more generally about the federal liability considerations that Wayne alluded to, just to dig a little bit more into when this is necessary, what types of those defenses under CERCLA you can get from a federal perspective, and where this phase one falls into preserving those protections. So we'll sort of refer to this as that, that big liability protection, because we're also going to talk a little bit more about some of that risk management and avoiding uncertainty and helping gain more knowledge to create less uncertainty in your projects, and where that can really be an asset in terms of risk management for a project, but also open up additional opportunities. So to get your federal liability, kind of to preserve those protections, particularly if you're coming in as a bona fide purchaser. So, there are a number of protections that you can have under CERCLA, and a number of kind of different positions you might be in when you're looking at purchasing a property. And the one where this is comes up the most is when you're lining up as a bona fide prospective purchaser. And that's a protection you can get when you've done all of these inquiries before you go in and purchase the property. So Wayne mentioned, this is when a phase one's happening before you purchase the property, it can preserve this protection from federal liability for you. It has a timeline and a shelf life. So something to just keep in mind with overall the general phase one, if you're going in to use that to sort of preserve that protection, your phase one really needs to be pretty current within kind of the last 180 days. And so just, something to keep in mind, these go stale when you're really looking at them just for that, when you're using them and really expecting them to provide those protections. There are a number of other, different types of protections, liability protections under CERCLA that we won't get into as much today because we're really focusing on that phase one. But one thing I wanted to note, and certainly you need phase ones for many of these. I just want to note, because we work with a lot of municipalities, and with tax foreclosure, there is a potential protections for involuntary, and I don't, from folks on the call, I don't know if many of you may work for municipalities or quasi-municipal entities. When the government has to take a property involuntarily, like for taxes or something like that, there are protections in place there. There are still opportunities to use a phase one, either, after you've had to take those steps or at some point in the process to really make sure you're, getting that due diligence and using it for other purposes beyond just getting that liability protection. So just something to keep in mind with its value as well, when you may be positioned a little bit differently for other defenses. And this is also where I'd note, talk to your local folks, talk to your experts before you're purchasing a property, so you make sure you're preserving those protections and you're not having to figure out, oh no, we purchased it without this due diligence in advance. So really talk to local folks early on in that process, so you make sure you're positioning yourself well for these liability protections. So that was state, kind of broadly state liability or federal liability considerations. Next slide, Wayne. Each state also has its own program and sort of its own protection and environmental protection agencies of some kind, whether it's, you know, a DEP or something like that, really looking at how are you, states also have these liabilities and ways that you can use phase ones and due diligence to get some sort of liability protection under state programs. So, you know, each of the states covered in Region 1 has some type of program. Typically they, you know, they're voluntary programs you join and it offers you liability protection through that program. It also, as Wayne mentioned, opens up doors to accessing a lot of accessing that financial assistance that the state may have or the state may administer on behalf of the EPA. These programs sometimes specifically reference a phase one as a requirement. Functionally, even if they don't say phase one, the due diligence that is done as part of phase one is as part of that phase one is needed to demonstrate your either eligibility for the program or upon entering the program. So, you know, really each state sets their programs up a little bit differently. I'll stress it again, talking to somebody in that state who's an expert on those programs is crucial to making sure you take the steps at the right time. So some may require that due diligence before you apply. Some may require it as an early step after application or after you enter some type of, you know, voluntary cleanup program. It really depends on the state. And so really making sure you've talked to that local person early on in the process, you know, before you've taken any steps, to make sure you're taking steps in the right order and at the right time to best avail yourselves of all of these liability protections and preserving different protections and defenses that you might have. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we're gonna, you know, outside of those liability protection from, you know, you're getting sued liability protection, there's a lot of other risk management and sort of protection from uncertainty that comes with not knowing what's happening at a site that phase ones can help alleviate. So first off, really just like at a core, as Wayne said, like knowledge is crucial to all of these projects. This provides more knowledge and reduces the uncertainty about what is going on at this site. It also can really open up and improve financing options for your projects. Many times it's required by lenders. You know, most of the time it'll be required by lenders that you've done this so that they know you've done your due diligence before you're getting financing for this project. It can also really, you know, all of that information that's in your phase one that Wayne talked about can strengthen your negotiations with folks across the board, whether it's with the seller or with lenders or with funders. The more knowledge you have about historic uses at the site, about what could be on the site, about what the community thinks about and knows about the site, is all makes you in a stronger position, puts you in a stronger position to negotiate along the way. So really looking at it as, and really making sure you recognize, you know, the importance of having really taking a site-specific view towards your phase one, because the more information you gather, the more opportunities you have to use that for risk management along the way. You know, the others, it can streamline transactions. The more information you have, the smoother processes can go. And so really keeping that in mind and, you know, knowing that it can be used for some of that. And then lastly, especially for folks who may be kind of in that municipal or quasi-municipal boat, land banks, municipal governments, and developers overall who are doing community engagement and doing outreach and needing to go before boards for zoning relief, everything like that. The more knowledge you have about the site, the more you can build a stronger case for why you're asking for X, Y, or Z. Or for why a community may feel really strongly about something you've said, you know, knowing more about historical uses, knowing more about what has happened at the site can really help you better understand and have more knowledge about what may, you know, what may be some of those hurdles or opportunities for this site in the future. Next slide, Wayne. So we'll just really quickly, you know, I alluded to this, Wayne talked about it a little bit, but just some other opportunities that having a phase one can open up. One, you know, it is a requirement, not, you know, for many funding, you know, grant funding opportunities that come from other federal programs, whether that's from HUD, CDB, you know, other programs that really are going to require this due diligence early on. And so making sure you've, you know, it may feel slightly like a box to check, but the ability to have gotten that and then utilize it to help strengthen the applications you're making, both from we've taken this into, you know, we've reviewed this and we are taking that into account in our narratives that we're submitting with these applications can be, you know, can be a powerful way to build that in and something that can help strengthen your applications, but also it's making sure you've actually complied with all the requirements to apply for certain federal grants. I mentioned that many commercial banks and lenders are going to require this. You know, it's going to open up doors for more funding, for more financing. If you've done this, there's not going to be a lot of places, particularly for larger loans that are, you know, that are lending without that consideration. There's also a lot in the private equity and investor space where this can really improve and open up those opportunities. Again, just the more information you're able to share about what you know about a project, the more excited you can get other folks for what you're looking to do. And then similar to federal programs, you know, state programs, regional programs, other programs kind of run by quasi-governmental entities, this will probably be a requirement. So just thinking through what are all the things we might need this for and how can we make sure when we're first getting our phase one, we are thinking about all of these possibilities to best create that tailored phase one for our site and for, you know, where we may be looking to go in the future. Next slide. So we'll really, this is just a key takeaways, really quickly going over, you know, what Wayne covered, a little bit about what I covered, and then hopefully, you know, we'll have a few minutes for questions from you all. And this slide, I'm not going to read through all of it, but hopefully it'll be a helpful resource for you all going forward as well. And for, you know, other folks who may watch this recording. So just a reminder, you know, what a phase one is, you know, it's looking at those historic uses that may have impacted soil, groundwater, and a risk to human health. It's making it site specific is really crucial. Completing it prior to acquisition, you know, when it's still ripe and new, prior to acquisition can be a liability defense. And then it can also be used as for meeting those requirements for state liability programs. Next slide. Wayne covered this quite a bit, but just a reminder of what it's not. It's not that proof of contamination, it's not testing, and it's not going to tell you how much a project is going to cost. And very broadly, you know, it's covered up above, but just remembering those liability protections and how it can be important when done in the right timeline and at the right times for the different protections you're looking for. And just, you know, thinking about those other uses for it. So other ways that a phase one can open up opportunities and can manage and mitigate risks along the way, keeping that in mind when you're getting the phase one and beyond, when you're reviewing it and when you're, you know, figuring out how are we applying for funding, how are we looking at redevelopment planning, how can this phase one be in to those pieces of a project. So that I think leaves us to questions from you all. Randy, Wayne, are we taking those in the chat or what's the easiest way?
Yeah, thank you, Monica. I'm not actually seeing